Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern, with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders. We speak with each, one to one. The writer Wendy Wasserstein was a child of New York and a good friend to the City University as well. She died far too soon, taking secrets with her, or so she thought. The writer Julie Salamon has written the first and only biography about her, Wendy and the Lost Boys, The Uncommon Life of Wendy Wasserstein. It's just been published by the Penguin Press. One of Julie's books, Hospital, opened windows into Maimonides Hospital. Another, Facing the Wind, focused on a horrific crime. She's been staff writer for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and she's also found time to write for the leading magazines. The Wasserstein family and Wendy's many friends gave her full access. It's a remarkable book about a complicated woman who achieved so much and wanted even more. Welcome.
Thank you.
Did you know Wendy, or did you happen to interview her while you were working at the Times?
I never met her. I reviewed one of her plays when it was made into a TV movie.
Which one?
American Daughter. And
Okay.
Not that well. So I came into it as an unbiased.
Okay. So what compelled you to write about her?
Andre Bishop, who was her literary executor, he's the head of the theater at Lincoln Center, had approached my editor at Penguin Press about maybe somebody being interested in doing a biography. He didn't want any control over it, but he wanted to make sure that it would be done thoroughly and well. And my editor, Ann Godoff, asked me if I would be interested. So I did a little preliminary research, and I saw that not only was Wasserstein a fascinating writer, she was an even more fascinating person. And I thought this could be a great project.
So you started working on it after she had died?
After she died.
What were you most surprised to learn about her in the course of your research?
I think the way she managed her life was extremely, I don't know if it was so much surprising, but endlessly fascinating. She was a woman who seemed so open. When I first started working on the book and I would say, oh, I'm doing a biography of Wendy Wasserstein, the first thing most people would say is, how's her daughter? And people seem to have this sort of intimate knowledge of everything about her, largely because she wrote about it. But then I began to see pretty quickly that she very carefully controlled the narrative of her life, much more so than most people, because she did it very publicly.
Right.
And so that just became endless surprises, one after another.
Interesting. Well, it all started with Lola and Morris, her parents. Tell me about them and how they influenced her.
Lola and Morris Wasserstein were immigrants to this country. They came from Poland, both as quite young people. Lola was 15 or 13 or 17. She never quite told her exact age. Morris was 6 when they moved here in the 1920s. And I think that really set the trajectory in a way of Wendy's life. She was the youngest child of immigrant parents. And Lola, as Morris was this nice guy, he was the perfect husband, and everybody said that one of the reasons he and Lola had such a great marriage was that he was a little deaf. So when things he could turn the hearing aid down. And Lola was this dynamo. I mean, she was an incredible woman. I think if she'd been born a generation later and maybe in this country, she would have run a huge company or something or been a hedge fund operator.
Right.
But her children were her enterprise, and she put everything into them and demanded a lot and was never satisfied.
Were they, the parents, did they serve as sort of good cop, bad cop, do you think, in Wendy's life? Lola sort of critical, ambitious, and demanding, and Morris just sort of quiet and loving and sweet, do you think?
I think that's a great way to put it, good cop, bad cop, although sometimes Lola was good cop, bad cop all by herself. The problem was that Morris was a very quiet good cop, whereas Lola was a very noisy bad cop,
Right.
And so I think that was the person who ended up having the most influence on Wendy.
Now, the Wassersteins were an affluent family. Morris, he did well in the ribbon business and later got into real estate. They had a big house. How big was the house in Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn, I forget, it had
18
14
rooms
rooms,
or
18
something.
rooms, yeah. But that was later. They started off poor. I mean,
Okay.
his story The Wasserstein brothers, of which Morris was the youngest, is a real rags to riches story. I mean, those boys came here with nothing. Their mother died on the boat coming over. Their father had come over ahead. By the time they got here, he was already involved with another woman and didn't really care too much about raising his son. So these boys ended up living alone in an apartment, raising themselves on the Lower East Side. I mean, they really scrambled. And they started this, they worked for somebody else in the ribbon business and then developed their own business. So they did not start wealthy. And I think that was another big influence in Wendy's life. Her older siblings really had a different childhood than she did because the family was not so wealthy when they were young. But by the time Wendy was born in 1950, height of the baby boom,
right.
The family was well-to-do.
You talk about the inferior-superior cycle in the Wasserstein family. What was that about?
Well, Wendy wrote about that in the Heidi Chronicles, which was the play that won the Pulitzer Prize. And I think for a lot of people in the baby boom generation, that play and its characters' dilemmas and anxieties came to exemplify a lot of their own neuroses and anxieties and desires. And Heidi, the main character in that play, really articulates this notion of being better than everybody else and not being as good as. And I think that's how Wendy was raised. So Lola, for example, when Wendy won the Pulitzer Prize, Lola supposedly said, I'd be just as happy if she married a lawyer. Or she told her relatives, I think Wendy won the Nobel Prize.
Right.
So either way, the Pulitzer wasn't good enough, and yet Lola's house was filled with memorabilia of Wendy and her other siblings. So they always knew they were better than everybody, but somehow whatever they did wasn't quite good enough.
For her, for Lola.
For Lola.
How Jewish were the Wassersteins?
Very and not at all. You know, like a lot of post-war Jews, I think, they were very much identified themselves as Jews. They lived in Brooklyn in an all-Jewish enclave. Wendy went to the yeshiva of Flatbush for a brief period of time, but they were not religiously observant. I think they went to the high holidays every year, and they celebrated holidays. They were sort of, you know, not atypical Reform American Jews. They did the holidays, they enjoyed bagels.
But Lola wasn't keeping kosher.
Lola was not keeping kosher, although her parents did back in Poland, but
Really?
She definitely didn't. And in fact, at Bruce's bar mitzvah, she was noticeable holding the prayer book upside down, so clearly she didn't read Hebrew.
The family secrets, what were they? What were the main ones?
The main family secrets were, the kids didn't really know until they were much older that Morris was not the only Wasserstein that Lola married. Her first husband was George Wasserstein, Morris's older brother. And George was a good-looking, he was the one that really got the family business going. He took care of his younger brothers. He and Lola had 2 children, Wendy's oldest 2 siblings, and then he died of appendicitis. Because he got it in the 40s before penicillin was widely available. And so he just died at age 29. And Morris, the younger brother, was living at home, so Lola married him. Mm-hmm. And then they had 3 more children. Wendy was 23 years old before she knew that her oldest sister, Sandy, who she worshipped, was actually her half-sister. Right. And so that was a big secret. But I think the biggest secret in the family, they were secrets that weren't secrets, you know, was the brother Abner. He was the second child of Lola and George. And when he was around 5, he had some kind of illness. It's not clear what it was, but a fever led him to have seizures. And he became developmentally disabled. And he stayed at home for a number of years. This was all before Wendy was born. But by the time Wendy was born, 10 years after Abner, he was already in a home for children. And the parents would visit him. They visited him every year, a few times a year. But at home, he became more or less a ghost.
And Wendy didn't know about him until she was older, right?
She didn't know about him until she was older. She knew about him by the time she was in her 20s, but it just wasn't discussed. And Bruce Wasserstein, her brother, told me, Abner wasn't a secret, he just wasn't discussed. And I think that's the kind of secret it was. Wendy met Abner finally when she was almost 50 years old.
Right. Just sort of like the Rosemary Kennedy of the Wasserstein family.
Exactly.
Wendy did not seem terribly promising as a young girl, even as a young woman. She was lazy, a lazy, indifferent student. She had bad grades. She was notoriously slovenly her entire life. She seemed to have little direction for a long time. She sort of stumbled into playwriting after she didn't get accepted at law school. I guess everybody applies to law school just as a backup. Even at Yale Drama School, she was not considered very gifted. She was one of the few in her small class who didn't win any prizes. So what was the turning point, do you think, that got her onto a career path as a playwright?
Well, it's one of the things I love the most about Wendy's story, especially for younger people. You can see that you can actually not be a superstar when you're 12 or 18 or 23 and still have a very successful career. And I think the turning point for Wendy, she'd always loved theater, but I don't think it had ever occurred to her that that was something she might take seriously. But she was back in New York after Mount Holyoke, where she went to college, you know, trying to figure out what to do. She had taken the law boards, didn't do too well, and she enrolled in a writing class at City College. And the teachers were Israel Horovitz and Joseph Heller, the novelist. And that class, I would say, changed her life, because Joseph Heller in particular saw that she was very funny. Their story goes around, many different versions of it, but the essence of it was that he would introduce her as the funniest girl in New York. And I think Wendy, who always made her career at Mount Holyoke of not doing so well at school, but being very good at entertaining her dorm mates, saw that her sense of humor, her ability to, she had amazing recall for conversations, was something that worked very well for a playwright. And I think with Heller, his encouragement led her to think, oh, maybe I could become a writer. And that was the thing that really started her off.
Okay. We're going to take a short break now, but we'll be back with more with Julie Salamon, author of Wendy and the Lost Boys, The Uncommon Life of Wendy Wasserstein. It's just been published by the Penguin Press.
How many trees in the cathedral? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Go, Dad! Go, Dad!
Take time to be a dad today.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Julie Salamon, author of Wendy and the Lost Boys, The Uncommon Life of Wendy Wasserstein. It's just been published by the Penguin Press. If City College was a sort of turning point for her, certainly I guess Yale Drama School was as well, and she was up there with a group of people who became very noteworthy, you know, in the theater business.
That's right. I mean, after City College, that's, I think, what gave her the courage to say, oh, I think I'll apply to drama school. But she still was, you know, hedging her bets. So she applied to drama school and business school, got into both, and then chose drama school. And at drama school, she had an amazing group of people there at the same time. They weren't either in her class or 1 or 2 years above it, but they were all at school at the same time. So there was Meryl Streep, Sigourney Weaver, Christopher Durang, who became a very, very close friend and supporter of Wendy's, the playwright, Christopher Durang, William Ivey Long, the costume designer who's designed, you know, costumes for every major show on Broadway.
And they became huge friends.
They
right?
became extremely close friends. All of these people, you know, William Finn, he wasn't at Yale Drama School. Paul Rudnick was there as an undergraduate, but got to know Wendy. Stephen Graham, who went on to start the New York Theater Workshop. So it was an incredible confluence of people. James Lapine, who became a, you know, incredibly well-known theater director and playwright himself.
Was Uncommon Women her breakthrough play?
Uncommon Women was definitely her breakthrough play.
And it was about, basically, it was about life at Mount Holyoke, basically.
Yes, as you know well, it was about life at Mount Holyoke. Mount Holyoke for Wendy was a very strange experience. On the one hand, she went there because she thought it was one of the Seven Sisters schools, so it had this sort of Ivy League pedigree. It looked like a college should look, this beautiful campus in the hills of western Massachusetts, but it was an all-girls school. It was very isolated. And it was the first time in Wendy's life that she was not in an all-Jewish environment. And I think that it was just a completely different group of people than she was used to. And it was very rigorous.
And even in the 60s, when the women's lib and civil rights and anti-war were cracking up, it was kind of tame. You know, at my last reunion, somebody said, well, we were just supposed to be nice girls. You're nice girls.
Well, that's right. And, you know, interestingly enough, Wendy was there during a big transformation period. She arrived at Mount Holyoke in 1967, just as the 60s revolution was starting to heat up and hadn't quite hit Mount Holyoke yet. And she graduated in 1971. And in those 4 years, everything changed. When she entered Mount Holyoke, they had gracious living where, you know, each girl was given a napkin to put in their cubby hole, and you dressed for dinner. And the student handbook is hilarious. It tells, the girls what to eat, who to date. It was really the parent away from home, and a pretty strict parent. By the time she graduated, things had gotten shaken up, even at Mount Holyoke, and it was a different world. And I think that Wendy's work would come to reflect a lot of the changes that happened in society during those 4 years.
She made ample use of her life and her friends in her work. Most writers do. How did that affect her relationship with her friends? And
definitely, I think a lot of writers use their friends and relationships in their work, but Wendy really used them. And she did have this incredibly photographic memory, or audiographic memory. She just remembered full conversations with people. And Uncommon Women, when it came out, a lot of her friends from Mount Holyoke were shocked, actually. These were young women, and she wasn't yet a playwright, so a lot of things that were said to her in confidence or late night, and then she invited all the friends to see the plays, and I think for a lot of them it was extremely unnerving. And this was a pattern to see themselves and to hear things that they thought they had said in confidence being said on the stage. Now, other people in the audience wouldn't know that it was them necessarily, but they knew. Mm-hmm. And so I think throughout her entire life, I think a lot of artists have this experience, but I think because Wendy's work was so autobiographical in so many ways, she probably had it more than most, that there was always this incredible closeness, but a slight sense of betrayal.
Right. Now, I only saw one of her plays, Uncommon Women, on television, but my sense is that the main theme she was writing about was the modern woman coming of age in a time of women's liberation, the sexual revolution, and all of the hope, confusion, and disappointment that created, sort of not knowing what to do with all of this.
No, I think that's right. And I think an essential dilemma that ran through Wendy's life and ran through her work was how do you manage it all? How do you manage having children and a career and a love life? And is it possible to have a family and a successful career? I think that was a running theme throughout her life. And at the same time, the whole definition of what is a family was changing.
Right.
And her life reflected it as much as anything else.
Apart from Uncommon Women, the Heidi Chronicles and the Sisters Rosenzweig are the plays she's best known for. What do you think was about her plays that resonated with the public?
I think that what resonated with the public about her plays, and I'm certainly seeing that now as I've talked to people about the book, that I think for a lot of people of Wendy's generation, the baby boomers, the plays were like a mirror. Not for all baby boomers, but for baby boomers who were aspirational, who went to good schools, who had big ambitions for themselves. I think for that group of baby boomers, and there are a lot of them in the United States, her plays spoke directly, especially for women, to as you were saying, to their own hopes and dreams and frustrations about one set of expectations on the one hand, like Lola, you know, you have to be the best at everything you do, but you also have to marry a lawyer. And I think that for a lot of women of Wendy's generation, that was a big dilemma. What's interesting, though, a lot of that dilemma seems to still be in effect, because a lot of younger women have performed, especially in Uncommon Women. It's a very popular play for high schools and colleges because there are a lot of parts for women. And young women identify so much with the uncertainty of expectations. What is it that I'm supposed to be? How am I supposed to behave? Who am I? And I think that Wendy spoke in a very, and she was funny. So she asked these, you know, sort of big philosophical questions with a really good sense of humor. And I think that's what made her play so appealing to a sizable audience.
Did they also, and I hope it's your book and not some other book that I'm thinking about, but reflect the baby boomer feeling that there's been no generation better than us?
Yes, as a matter of fact, at the end of her life, Wendy wrote about everything. I mean, incredible. Up to the minute she died, literally. She was working on a novel in her hospital bed. She wrote a play about her relationship with her cancer doctor. I mean, every aspect of her life she recorded. And one of the last essays she wrote was for a magazine, and it was about the baby boom. And she said exactly what you're saying. We were the best generation. And she said it with irony. We were supposed to be the best and the most revolutionary and the most far-reaching, and we were always supposed to stay young. And she wrote a very funny bit about, you know, about a generation that was, as they were approaching their 50s and 60s, were trying to hold back the march of time.
Right. She has some rather awesome siblings. Sandra, who was a banking executive, Bruce, the financial tycoon that we know about, her other sister, Georgette. What was your impression of Bruce?
Well, Bruce was probably, I would say, after Lola, Bruce was probably the most influential person in Wendy's life. They were the two youngest of the 5 siblings, and they were loving, they were competitive, they were extremely close. And they were both extremely successful in their separate spheres, but their separate spheres were quite different. Wendy was successful in the artistic realm, Bruce in the world of finance, and not just finance, but in the world of investment banking. And consequently, he made a lot of enemies in that business, as people do who are successful there, and he was a very secretive person. And so they had a very loving but wary relationship. When I started working on the book, I met a guy who was a Wall Street guy at a party, and I told him what I was working on, and he said, I want you to answer one question. He said, what's the DNA that produces both Bruce and Wendy?
Yeah, right.
And that was that was a guiding light question for me throughout the book.
The impression was that many of her, that many people had, was that I got from the book, is that she had lots of friends, was a great friend, was really generous with her money and her time, but that she was also very lonely.
I think that's right. I think that's right. You know, I think that, again, the question of reality and unreality kind of got mixed up in Wendy's mind. She had a number of men friends she was incredibly close with and even thought of starting a family with, but they were always unavailable men. They were either gay or married or in some way not men who were going to want to be with her. She ended up having a child as a single mother at age 48.
And we don't know who the father was.
We don't know who the father was. She used a sperm donor, and so
Okay.
the father is known in some ways, but not like the guy next door.
Right, right.
Or maybe he was, but I don't think she knew that. And so I think that maybe all writers are a little bit lonely. You know, I think people who immerse themselves in a world of fiction understand that, you know, at bottom, we, I guess, are all alone. And I think Wendy probably understood that more than most people.
We have probably about 30 seconds left. Did she ever win Lola's approval, do you think? Or feel that she won it?
I think she always had Lola's approval.
She just didn't know it.
She just didn't know it, and Lola couldn't express it.
Very interesting book. I enjoyed it a lot. I want to thank Julie Salamon for joining me today. Wendy and the Lost Boys, The Uncommon Life of Wendy Wasserstein, has just been published by the Penguin Press. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.
The Heidi Chronicles, in some ways, I always thought was the best it ever was at that first reading. Maybe it was because it was so much about my generation and the people who were there, and I felt it was revealing in a way, a sort of style of play that I hadn't written before, that I found it, I was very moved by that. And what was interesting was at the course of the play, some people said to me, "Oh, did you make all those women up?" And I thought, surely.